Opportunity to present here. I'll do the first introduction of the company I work for. Bejo is a breeder of vegetable seeds for the professional grower. So we aim for the high end of the market. Together with our growers, we're in it for the long term, so our responsibility does not end with the sales of a bag of seeds. We're constantly raising the bar with innovations by putting a big deal of our turnover into R&D. We try to be a sustainable company and still be out there 50 years from now together with our growers. And we aim to have the best seeds for the best varieties in our crops. The company has been around for 120 years. It started with two families starting in the seed trade. That's where the name comes from. Beemsterboer and Young are the family names, so B-E-G-O is Bejo. From the 1980s onward, we're starting expanding in Europe and then further all over the world. And now we have subsidiaries in over 30 countries. And the final topic, the takeover of a lettuce breeding company, is important with respect to an example in my presentation. So the company has 1,800 employees worldwide. We have quite a broad assortment in vegetable full-field crops, 50 crops with over 1,200 different varieties. We're quite proud of our organic program, and now recently we have expanded into all of our available crops. You see that only part of our conventional assortment is suitable for the organic growth, because there we only have 190 varieties that can be organically produced and grown by our customers. And we are a globally operating company, so we have breeding, production and sales all over the world. And also for production, that's quite handy because you can produce on the northern and the southern hemisphere to have a secure seed production throughout the year. A bit on our assortment. So it's based on 5 pillars. Our main crops are in the brassicas, in the rooted crops like carrot and red beet, alliums together with our partner De Groot and Slot. And the other crops are smaller fruit crops. We're still a very relatively young company in tomato, pepper and sweet pepper. And also in the leaf crops like spinach and lettuce, we're active. This is an indication of the development time of our varieties. And for some varieties, like in the fruit crops, you can have several breeding cycles per year. So the development time is quite short. But most of our crops are biannual crops. For instance, cabbage. In the first year you have to grow a head of cabbage, and only when it goes through winter, then the head of cabbage will burst open, the flowers will come out, and you can do your next cross or seed production. So for most of our crops, one breeding cycle takes up to 2 years. And that leads to long development times for our crops, 10 to 15 years. And also the market introduction takes quite some time. So we have a lengthy process for the development of our varieties. And this is the development cycle for the varieties. So first we have market identification together with our growers and together with the value chain. When we know the market's wishes, then we can start a development process in a combined effort of breeding and research. Then we do the field testing trials together with our companies of the varieties that have been developed in that way. And only when the varieties meet the wishes of our consumers and customers, then it has to go through a seed production and processing, and we can do the market introduction. This is an indication of the presence of breeding stations for Bejo. You can imagine that if you try to develop a variety for the highlands of Guatemala, that would take quite a different breeding approach than breeding for continental Europe. So we have to be out there in the world. We have to have our breeding locations close to our customers. When we have developed our varieties, they are tested in the surrounding countries of those breeding locations. And in that way, we have a good coverage of our sales activities, which stretch out into almost all countries of the world. But it all starts in Warmhuizen, and also all the seeds that we produce ends up in Warmhuizen. And there we have the chance to do a good quality control. We do the processing of the seeds and the storage, and then we can pack it and ship it off to the customers. And Holland is also the basis of our research center. So the breeding is a global operation, but our research center, both for breeding support and for seed technology, is focused in one spot in Warmhuizen in the Netherlands. So the rest of the presentation will focus on 4 topics: breeder's exemption in breeding, variety protection in hybrid vegetable crops, variety protection in OP varieties, and new breeding techniques and EDV concept. So for us, the breeder's exemption is highly valuable because we can work with the top genetics in the market that is available out there, and we can make combinations with our own breeding pool and work from that. And in that way, we are constantly raising the bar with improved varieties, with better traits, better disease resistance traits, and better quality of the product for our growers. And because the genetic background of a hybrid variety is protected as such, this means that the breeding companies can get a fair revenue for all the expenses that they make and all the time they put into the breeding process. Because we're spending quite a substantial amount of our annual turnover in R&D. And for Bejo, this amounts to 15% of our turnover, or 45 million euros annually. And there are other vegetable seed companies that even top that by a fair margin. And that's quite difficult from other branches of industry, where maybe 1 or 2% of the annual turnover is reinvested into product development. So we spent quite a bit of money and time to produce the best varieties. Sometimes just variety protection is not enough. If you have a disease resistance, for instance, and in your current gene pool you have no disease resistance whatsoever, then sometimes you have to go back to wild relatives of your crop. And that development process can take decades, because you have to combine resistance with crop quality. And that takes quite a number of crosses and testings. And then sometimes we rely on trade patents to protect this lengthy process of development. But still, we also would like to have fair access to other patents of other vegetable seed companies, and also they would like to have access to our patents. So there's been development, international licensing platform has been set up, and that provides for fair access to the complete patent portfolio of the participating companies. And it's free access, but it's not access for free, but you always get a fair rate of access. So most of our crops are hybrids, and there the situation is quite easy. It's difficult to come up with an EDV, because hybrid varieties are formed by crossing a female and a male inbred line. And because of the inbred step, then the parental lines are uniform, and this will also give a hybrid product from those parental lines that is uniform in quality, disease resistance, and harvest time. So for a grower, it's quite convenient if he has to go into a field of cauliflower that he can all harvest the heads of cauliflower at the same time. They have the same disease resistance, they have the same appearance, and the same quality for the market. And the added benefit for the companies is that a hybrid variety can only be produced or reproduced if you have access to the parental lines. And we only sell the hybrid seed, we don't sell our parental lines. So if you would do further crossing with a hybrid variety, then you will get a full segregation in the next generation. That also provides for a form of protection. Because if you have the parents over here and the F1 plant over there, if you would sell that plant, you will have a full recombination, a full mix of the chromosomes of the parental lines. And in that way, in your next generation, you will have a complete random mix and no two plants are the same. And it's very difficult to recreate the initial parental lines from that progeny. Sometimes when you work with a self-incompatibility system in your hybrids, it can happen under adverse conditions, like for instance severe drought during seed production, that the female parental line is present in hybrid seed lots. And the breeding companies are aware of that, and there's a kind of gentleman's agreement not to use each other parental's mother line that you would find in a commercial seed lot. To avoid that, more and more you see that male sterility is used in hybrid seed production. So for instance, in cabbage you have the Augura cytoplasm where the plant is unable to form viable pollen on the plants, and that gives an extra layer of protection. And we protect our hybrids by breeders' rights on the parental line. So in normal breeding practice, the chances that you would end up with EDV from a competitor's breeding program with a protected variety are pretty slim, unless you do it really deliberately. If you do a molecular analysis of the hybrid seeds, and you can also look, for instance, at endosperm to see the constitution of the female parental line. In that way, you could recreate or mimic the initial variety by coming up with a combination of derived parental lines. But then, yeah, it's really a deliberate breeding process to come up with a copycat variety. In OP varieties, it's quite different. So OP varieties are open pollinated varieties, and they are reproduced by selfing or mass pollination. So in these varieties, you only have one parental line, so to say, and the resulting seeds, the seeds that are sold to our customers, can also be used to multiply exactly the same material. And breeding with this material is more likely to result in an EDV when you compare it to breeding with hybrid crops. In Bejo, we started a lettuce program in 2015, and there we have a crop that is strictly OP, so all lettuce varieties are OP. And that's why I based my example on lettuce. And there's an agreement also in the ISF already in 2004, I think, that if you breed with a competitor's variety, the use of that variety more than once in a recurrent backcross scheme would potentially lead to an EDV. So there's a kind of warning. You can use the competitor's varieties, but don't use it several times to cross onto your own germplasm. Now, new breeding techniques, they offer quite a bit of opportunities, and especially in open pollinated crops like lettuce, and that will impact the EDV concept. So, for instance, if you take Bremia resistance, that's really important in the lettuce market. It's a make or break trait in the market. You see here, if the pathogen attacks the leaf, you'll have quite a bit of cosmetic damage and the end product will be useless for the market. So coming up with Bremia resistance is a big breeding goal in lettuce. But it's also a kind of rat race between the breeder and the pathogen, because resistance is often broken because of adaptability of the pathogen within 2 to 5 years. And most resistances come from wild relatives of lettuce. But if you look at the new breeding techniques and the opportunities that these techniques offer, then you can have the situation that a third party, a tech company even, without its own breeding program, can come up with a means to come up with a durable resistance against Bremia. And one of the targets that is heard quite often in crop breeding is susceptibility genes. And these susceptibility genes, they provide the gateway, the doorway into the plant cell. And by knocking out these susceptibility genes, then you can prevent the pathogen from coming in. And that would lead to a durable resistance. So what if this third party would decide to take the top varieties of all the major breeding companies in lettuce and decide to edit Bremia resistance in those varieties? Then according to some interpretations of the EDV concept, the trait Bremia resistance, or durable Bremia resistance, would be sufficiently innovative to claim that the developed varieties do not qualify as EDV. And in this way, the initial developers would lose their competitive advantage in the market, and they would lose market share by being replaced by their own material, by their own improved varieties. And they would receive no financial compensation because of the non-EDV principle. The OP nature of the crop will mean also that this tech company or the company without its own breeding program can multiply the material without the need to contact the breeder. And seed production of the improved varieties is easily achieved. And in this way, the third party can benefit from years of market developments, breeding effort and contributions to public research products by the initial breeding companies at very limited cost. So my take-home message is that an incorrect interpretation of the explanatory notes can lead to an imbalance in variety rights. Thus, an opening of the explanatory notes can be a remedy for this imbalance, and the breeding companies need this remedy because they have to protect their investments for all their breeding efforts. And only in this way you can have continued improvement of the varieties, and that can be translated into the farmers' benefits because they profit from the improvement of the varieties that we offer. Thank you very much.
Thank you.